Hello and welcome to the channel. I'd like to discuss an aspect of dials which I recently discovered, and this totally changed my understanding of antique Swiss pocket watch dating. Now, what we are going to be concerned with today is how a watch dial is signed. So this is a question of bold print versus cursive writing, and does this have any difference in the dating of a pocket watch? Is one older, is one younger, etc.? Now, we will not be able to approach this question unless we have enough information to solve this. And I had a theory about this very question for some time, but only recently was I able to come to a conclusion. Now, in order to address this question, one has to have a certain amount of data related to the watches. Generally, this comes from the watch architecture itself, the case, and other design characteristics, this technological aspect, architecture of the watch. Now, oftentimes this is not available and we have only a movement and a dial. However, there are other ways that we can approach this. Now, if we are seeking some sort of chronological sequence, then we have to rely upon the serial number of the watch in question. And serial numbers are chronological in general. We have these établisseurs who are ordering watches, ordering the movements, for example, from various producers if they don't have this in their own house. And these would have been under a certain sequence of numbers which fit their ledgers, as these serial numbers represent the invoice number when sold to the customer. So for their own bookkeeping purposes, and for the sake of clarity, we have this sequential flow for these watch serial numbers. So this is quite important. So therefore, in coming to our this whole question of dating and the sequential which came before the one or the other, then we have to rely upon these serial numbers. And it is going to be very interesting when we compare the watch which has the bold print Artisan's signature versus an actual cursive signature, which is, these are both hand painted on these enamel dials from this mid 19th century till the end of the 19th century. So these are still hand painted dials at this point, but yet the style, does this tell us anything? This is the question that we're, which is our concern today, and I would like to share this with you. And I would like to invite you on this journey. So we do have our material evidence, which is in the form of either the watches, the pocket watches themselves, or merely the dial and movement, which is all that it remains of this artifact. So let us now look at some cases, and we will go step by step, and at each stage we will look at a particular artisan who was signing, and we will examine which came first, which has the lower serial number, the bold print or the cursive. And this is our concern today. In our first analysis, I would like to start with two watches, or in fact a watch and a dial. And now these watches, we have a very good idea of when they were fabricated, and this is essentially because we have a record of other watches with similar serial numbers, and they fit into various periods. So we look at the first watch, which is this is the Montandon Watch block print signed object, and this is dating circa 1857, and the serial number is 13671. Now, in comparison, we have a watch which we know to be dating from around 1869 because of the patent numbers on parts which are dated specifically on these into locations. So this object, and it is only a movement with the dial, this has a serial number of 22,376. So here we have immediately one example that the block print version is an 1857 piece. It has a serial number of 13,671, and the later piece, which is a cursive writing style, is already up at 22,376, yet we know that the dating is 1869 at least, because there are patent dates on the watch that it could not have been before this. Therefore, it would appear that the theorem that a block print watch signing predates the cursive style, that this seems to be the case. Now let us look at another example. Now we are dealing with the fabricant de horlogerie who was signing Montandon, Geneva. And we have this very interesting piece. Now this is signed Montandon, Geneva, and the serial number of this piece is 57,026. And we have this block print. Now this is quite fascinating, as we do know that a series of Montandon, Geneva watches were discovered. Now these were actually empty boxes which had the serial numbers of these watches. This was some sort of theft or a customs fraud, and we have multiple serial numbers from this 1864 article, and these are running in the 64,000 range, in the low 64,000. So clearly we know that 1864 for Montandon, Geneva, and this 64,000 series, this is already 1864. Therefore, we probably have a good idea that this Montandon, Geneva, this is most likely late 1850s, based on, if we assume that the watchmaker was selling on average between 200 and 500 watches per year. This would bring him to the late 1850s. So this is entirely plausible. Now, when we look at the cursive writing signature for this Montandon, Geneva, well, this is much larger. This is 70,028, and this is clearly beyond this period. This is most likely towards 1870, perhaps in the middle of this 1870 decade, but this is clearly, this is probably no earlier than the late 1860s. That much is for certain. Now, these watches were generally between 1850 and almost 1880. So we have a large period to sort of analyze. However, this serial number is and the actual signing, the way that this is rendered via the medium of block print versus cursive, this does give us a fairly good idea that it is starting to appear that block print signatures were favored in the late 1850s until at least the mid 1860s. This is more or less Civil War era for the United States. And these were watches that were going in. We do see this general style in American Civil War era pieces with this block print signature. So let us look at the next specimen. So the next specimen we have L. Montandon Locla, and we have two pieces, and once again, we have the block print version of the artisan's signature. This piece has a serial number of 30,129. And when we look at later watches, his later pieces are much higher, but once again, we do have a cursive signature with the number of 62,001. And this is really fascinating that we are finding. Now, we know that the individual who was most likely fabricating under the name of Montandon Locle, this was Louis Frédéric Montandon, and he was in Le Brenet at this period, the late 1850s, up until the mid 1860s. And it does appear to reflect both chronologically and stylistically. Then when we see these huge differences that we can certainly ascribe an earlier date in this watch remnant. This movement and dial clearly do reflect an 1850s feel to it. This is a porcelain dial, whereas later they became only enamel. But these and these can be very noticeable in the copper plate when they break away from the sides, as we have in this case. We see this is clearly older than, say, 1870s. This is evident. So the technology was changing, and it is more evident in the more refined production capabilities that they were enjoying later. So let us look at another example. We have many watches signed H. Montandon Locle, and these all tend to be cursive writing, with an exception. The place location, Locle, is almost always rendered in block print, and it is only later, much later, that we find a cursive rendering of Locle as well. And in this case, we do have watches which, for example, we have the object 47,787. This is with the block print of Locle. Now the artisan's name is cursive, however the city is in block print. Yet by the other example that we have a watch which is clearly much higher, and this is around 139,000. So we know that this is much later, and indeed this movement style is entirely different. And this is a smaller watch, but we do know that this is early 1880s, and so once again we have a huge gap in the signature, the serial numbers. But it is interesting to note that only there is a difference, that the city is in bold, whereas later it becomes cursive. This is probably an indication that H. Montandon Locle was fabricating these pieces during probably the 1870s, and certainly by the 1880s we find him already, the stylistic is totally cursive on the dial signature. So now there is another H. Montandon, however this is La Chaux de Fonds, and this is an entirely different artisan. Now his piece does date from this circa 1856 to 1866 period, and the serial number is 12,027. Now this is all block. Rendering of the name and the La Chaux de Fonds rendering. Therefore, and the individual that we associate with this watch is fabricating from La Chaux de Fonds from that period, and he was actually for several years with his father fabricating, and indeed they would both seem to have been fabricating in general with Geneva. However, later we do find some examples of La Chaux de Fonds as a signature, but this is clear. The dating is continuing in this pattern, and this is something that we can, once again, H. Montandon La Chaux de Fonds, the the block printing, and we have this 1856 to 1866, which is exactly where we'd expect this style of signature rendering. Now there are other watches with signatures, and these were probably watches that were enjoyed by a multitude of fabricators, probably smaller fabricators, but not necessarily. This is a much more general watch signing, and this is Montandon Watch. However, these pieces are all seeming to be only cursive, with the exception of when we see that Lokla can be rendered in bold, again, as in the H. Montandon Lokla. This probably is indicative of the dating, and this would be during the 1870s, probably the mid-1870s. And as the fabricator is not 100% clear to us, these watches tend to come without maker marks of any kinds, yet it is clear that this was a very popular name at this time, as we find many references to attempts at counterfeiting basically expropriating the name. So, but we do have only in general the cursive. This is more or less following the same mold as H. Montandon Watch. Now we also have watches signed Albert Montandon, Geneva, and this has been ascribed because of the discovery of an article in the Geneva Press from 1869 that this was a trade name for a company, and it is not entirely clear whether within this company there was an artisan by this name that was fabricating. This is a possibility, but yet it is made very clear in this article that this signing is basically a trade name owned by this company of the widow John Magnan and Guilladin. So knowing this is the case, and these watches do appear from this late 1860s, circa 1869, and we see this throughout the 1870s and into the 1880s, that this is probably the reason why we only see cursive variations or examples of this, that there do not seem to be any block print versions of this, and therefore this is probably because this signing was not available during the mid-1860s. This was only acquired circa 1869 when it was declared in the press as their ownership and their property. So this does seem to come through, in the dating that we have suggested. We also have a very interesting Charles Adolphe Montandon piece. This is only the movement in dial, and this has a serial number of 19,757, and with their sequence of serial numbers, we can date this from 1870. This is circa 1870 based on the serial number, and this is indeed we find the cursive writing, which tends to verify that we're seeing once again cursive by 1870, and the style or the taste for this block print, which probably when it was originally employed was very modern and very interesting to the customer, but cursive signatures appear to have become much more sophisticated and desired, that this was a very beautiful rendition that the customer was looking for. So this is a very interesting example to us. We also have the case where certain artisans do not seem to have ever signed their dials. And this might have been because of preferences. However, this also could likely be that the établisseur was simply not able to get this service done for the price that would allow him to have enough profit to realize these watches. Therefore, this would have been another cost on top of his production, and this is probably the reason why we do not see it here. Yet, we do see on these watches that the dust cover has signatures. And once again, we do have the case of a block print signature versus a cursive signature. Now, I do believe that this is the same general characteristic in the watch signings that transfers also to the dust cover itself. So block print, we can compare these two F Montandon Watch pieces, and we find a block print signature dust cover and the cursive version. And as you can see, you can compare by the serial numbers yourself. So we have exhausted across the board this theorem, and we appeared to be able to prove it correct in each and every, and these are various watchmakers. These are different watchmaking artisans. So their signature, the stylistics seem to be the same in all events. There was a preference for the bold printed signature, which apparently fell out of favor by the mid-1860s. And in general, we see the same watchmaker. We see their watches are becoming only cursive signed variations of this, and this tends to reinforce the idea of what was favorable at the time. Now, this may not be a universal case. There are probably instances that can be found later, and indeed this printed variation most definitely did make a resurfacing later, when example we do have in late 1880s the Telemetro Montandon. This was a military artillery watch, and we do see how it is printed in the bold. So clearly there's a cycle to this. However, in general, when we have a single watchmaker or a single house fabricating production, that we see that their earlier versions are in the block print, whereas they progress to this cursive. And so this realization that now we're able to prove this by thoroughly going through all of these scenarios, that we can definitely say that when we're finding these block print versions, that they preceded the cursive versions. And this is indeed a revelation as far as our own understanding of a certain watchmaker's own production. But this gives us insights, and it also aids us in, to a certain extent, on the dating. Of course, that we must be able to enjoy confirmation through biographical information when we know a watchmaker. That this sort of fits very nicely when we have this data, that this isn't yet one extra layer of confirmation. So I hope this was interesting. I hope this provides food for thought for those interested in historical analysis of watchmakers and their wares. And I hope that our discussion was useful. So I wish you a very nice weekend, and thanks for your attention.